everybody, Karen the Warp Spinster here. Thanks for joining me today. This is part 2 of the video that I did on Sunday where I was applying this bias strip to the top of that piece. This time I'm going to try a sort of a reverse applique effect. And I have pieced this off camera so that you don't have to watch me do that. I have a video on crumb quilting, which I will link below, as well as I talked a little bit about it in the previous video, and I will link that as well. So basically I just pieced this bit knowing that I wanted to do kind of an angle there, so I had longer pieces here, shorter pieces here, cut that off, and then started adding these pieces on so that they would fit that size. Then I chop something off and put it up. So it's just basically basic crumb quilting. And I must have something on my iron. I've got some goofy stuff there I'll need to clean up later. So what I am planning to do is to cut, I think I'm going to try a spiral, because I think I can do that here better than with bias tape, because it's going to be a pretty tight curve. And then I will use a stitch to applique it onto a piece of fabric that I will have underneath it. I don't need one this big, but I didn't want to wrangle a whole big bunch of white fabric up here, so I just cut a piece. All right, so my plan, originally I thought about drawing on this spiral with a white chalk pencil, basically. And I was all prepared to do that. Couldn't find my white chalk pencil. I know where I used it last, but apparently I moved it from there. Anyway, so I decided I would use freezer paper. It would be easier to make changes. If I don't like what I drew, then it would be much easier to erase it here. So I'm just going to mark, and this is the last of my freezer paper. I need to get some more. I don't use it often, but when I do, I want it. So that's basically the size I'm going to do, and I want it to kind of go this way. So and like that, and I can tell already that I want that to be larger in there. I don't want to get too crazy with the curl because I do have to stitch this. I might even actually, I have to leave room to cut both sides of this. So I need to have like a channel in the middle. Do I want to do a point? Well, we'll worry about that later. And this is not going to be perfect. I mean, I could use a French curve and do this, and I'm just not interested in doing that. If you want to be more precise about what you're doing, of course, you can do that. Imagine there are some engineers and some graphic artists out there who are thinking, oh no, that's a little flat over here. How do I feel about that? It is longer than it is wide. Now I need to look at it from this direction. And it isn't going to be perfect ever when I'm freehanding it. So what do I want to do here? Do I want it to come to a point, or do I want it to be, let's do it to a point. I'm not always really good about doing that, but with a zigzag stitch, which is what I'm going to use, but I will see what I can do with this. And then down here at the bottom, this is sort of looking like a backward question mark, isn't it? I'm just going to do straight. I could take it off the edge, maybe I will do that. So I'll just, here's my edge there, so I'll just extend that curve. Now, through the magic of freezer paper, we are going to place this and then press it on. I have some plans for either this side or this side. I think I'm going to add some additional on that side. I need to leave myself a seam allowance there, all of that, and then of course I need to move this off of my cutting mat. It would be just like me. I will probably also put some pins in here just because I'm going to be flinging around this piece as I cut, and freezer paper is not a permanent stick, of course. What we like about it is that you can pull it up and reposition it. Alrighty, we'll see how that does. Again, I have not tried this, so if it falls apart, at least we know that it's mine and not yours. So you can learn from my potential mistakes. I need a different pair of scissors than I have here, so I'll be back after I retrieve one. Now you could, of course, use your rotary cutter to cut around here. I'm not really comfortable doing these curves, especially when I have so much piecing going on, things can shift too easily. If I did that, I would use my protective glove. This is Vons and Porter, and I think they call it the klutz glove. It comes in different sizes, but I would use that to protect my fingers as I'm holding on. But I'm just going to use scissors here and probably speed this up. You all know how to cut. Now this has been cut out, and I actually have a couple of pieces that are probably too narrow to piece into crumb block, but it might be kind of fun to applique these on, just like I did with the seam bias tape. Put that on white or black or something. So I am going to save those. And I am doubly glad that I used the freezer paper because this helps me to lay this out flat without messing around so much with the fabric. So now this is going to have white under it. And of course, this is where you make a decision. Do I want white under that? Do I want something different? I know I want to do white so that it will go in the same quilt as the piece that I did on Monday, but it might be interesting to try, say, a black and white on here. Let me lift this up. Just the top part. So we can see how it might look with black and white under it. It's going to be messy. It's going to be messy. I may leave you for a while and come back so you don't have to watch the mess. And that's how it would look with the black and white under it. I don't hate it. I think it might be okay. If I did that, would I use black or white thread? I would have to test that out if I were going to use this. Of course, you could use a completely different black and white print. Maybe something with a dot on it. I love dots. And this swirl kind of mimics the swirl of the shape, but I know that in this case I want to use white, so I'm going to pull that aside, bring the white back, and we'll see how that looks with white. it is a less energetic piece, shall we say. And I'm good with that. The other one with the swirls and the black and white really has a lot of movement and energy to it, which is not a bad thing, but this is what I'm going for right now. So let me take the pins off the paper and lift that up. And now I'm going to pin this down as I want it to be. So I'm going to mess around with this a little bit and come back. And now I'm going to start pinning this. Some on the edges here, just so that it's going to all stay in place while I'm stitching this with a zigzag stitch. I'm going to do a zigzag because you could also do, say, a blanket stitch, but my machine, I don't like the blanket stitch on my machine. Ordinarily, a blanket stitch would do stitch, stitch, bite, stitch, stitch, bite. Mine does stitch, 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 bite. So it does 3 stitches first. Even if I shorten the stitch length, I just don't like the looks of it. So I'm going to use zigzag. I think that other decorative stitches that I have might be not so attractive as I'm going around these curves. But give it a try if you're proficient with your decorative stitches. That might be an option for you. I'm possibly overdoing the pinning, but I'd rather have too many than not enough as I'm doing this. I think I'm ready to stitch. Now, because I have curves, just to review, when you are coming around a curve, you want to, if you need to stop, you put your needle down. If you need to rotate a little bit as you're going around a curve, put the needle down so that it's to the left position. So my zigzag is going like this. I'm going to plant my needle here, do a little bit of rotate that way, and it needs that on the outside of the curve, it needs that little bit of extra, because just like when you're running track, this part of the curve is longer, and you need to allow the zigzag to be a little longer, so it's a little bit shorter here as you rotate it. I am off to do that. Now I'm going to show you this piece, and I will tell you up front that I'm not happy with how it turned out. So you could call this a fail, or I'm calling it a fail, not fail, because I learned a lot of things doing this. I still like the concept, but this acted as a test piece, I guess. And so I want you to be able to learn from what I did wrong on mine, or at least for what I wanted, it was wrong. And just some sloppiness that I had going on here, to be perfectly honest. I don't consider it a fail in that I learned a lot. And that's what happens when you play with fabric. Sometimes it just looks awful and you learn from that. So I could have just deleted this video and done something different, but I wanted to share with you what I learned so that you don't have to go through this process yourself, or at least you will have different issues with it than I have. First of all, the stitch length and width matters a lot to me. The first time, this is the first one here, this sloppy round here. And from this, I learned that I thought I wanted the stitches to be, the stitch length to be shorter so that the stitches are closer together, closer to a satin stitch, although not a satin stitch. I also learned that, well, I started out with a very, we'll talk about this point in a minute. I started out with a very narrow stitch here, which is, can be appropriate for when you're coming to a point, but I did it poorly, and I decided that I really didn't like that width at all, so I increased it as I went around. Then the other thing is how I aimed my machine in going around here. And I originally wanted it to just catch the edge of the pieced fabric on top, but I wasn't always very good about that, and so I have these extra threads hanging out here, and I don't like that. And I can't really go in and trim them because then I run the risk of cutting the stitches. Going around, I started out quite slowly and it was fine, and then as I moved around I got impatient, which is common for me, and I went faster, and so it is sloppier. You can see that as I was coming around these curves I wasn't paying good enough attention, so that happened. Now this point, which is way off, I started out here when I did this first round, I started out here and went around to here. For this second round, I started here and came up to this point, and I missed it entirely. Partly because this green is very hard to see in my sewing machine, even with the light on. It was hard to see where I was, so I missed it completely. But doing it again, I would have started here instead of here and gone around that way. I would have been able to aim better at the start instead of trying to find it as I finished up. Now, aside from my general sloppiness, I'm normally a hand applicator, so there are those of you out there who could probably have done this and it would look like quilt couture. So the second time I thought, well, I want this stitching to be closer together. So I did that, and I thought I was going to like it, and then I got to looking at it, and I don't think I do. It's like I kind of was going to do a satin stitch, and then I didn't, and I just don't like it. And again, I did not do my curve slowly enough. What I ended up, as I'm looking at this, what I ended up liking was just this small section right here, not this side, on this side, because I think it gives some texture and interest to the edge, but it isn't too distracting. A satin stitch just wouldn't be right for the modern quilt that I want to make. Might be all right if you were doing a different style of quilt, but it's not what I'm looking for. This is pretty much what I'm looking for, just this section right here. So that was valuable, so that I know what the stitch width and length would be for that, and exactly where I want these stitches to fall. So it would be, pull my presser foot off here. It's probably common on machines, but on my presser foot, I need to aim for the center. Let's see if I can find a white piece of paper here. Maybe that would be better. There is a slot in the center here, and that's where I aim for the edge of the fabric on my zigzag stitch. I was not as good about that in the first round as I should have been, but I hit it right at that point. Now, after I did this, and I actually filmed my confession about how I didn't like this, but I decided, well, let me try it with even closer to a satin stitch. So I just cut off a corner here to try that, and I don't like that at all. Partly because it's going to stretch this out more as I'm moving along and distort it, but I just don't like the look of it either. So I'm going to be aiming for this when I redo this. This is just my test, fail, not fail. And now I know how I want to do that. Now, in addition, the next time that I do this, and I will do another one, just not on camera today, the next time I do this, I think instead of using freezer paper, I'm going to use a double-sided web, fusible web, and that, when I start stitching then, that's going to help control this stretch that I'm getting. And the stretch is more pronounced. You'll notice here it's more pronounced as the stitching gets closer together, as my stitch length shortens. So that will help to control that. And I think it will also, you can see here that this lines up pretty well. This misses. And in a way, I don't care about that. But if I cared about it, then the fusible web, I think, would help to hold that so that when I was shifting it around, it would have stayed in place better when I was putting the fabric down, pinning it to get ready to stitch it. So I think that a fusible web would be better control. So if you are looking at this and thinking that is just butt ugly, you are absolutely correct. But that's what happens when you play with fabric. Sometimes you get things that you really love, and sometimes it's like, yeah, I didn't do that so well. But when I try again, I'll know what I want to do because I learned from my mistakes on this. So I wanted to give you this video, even with this embarrassingly bad result, so that you could learn what I learned and you wouldn't have to make those mistakes anyway. Another thing I want to point out before I go here is, of course, I could have used different thread. I could have used black thread, which I might have done if I had used this fabric underneath. I could have used a variegated thread because I have so many colors going on here. But honestly, I'm not a huge fan of variegated thread. So I think the white's okay. I mean, if I look at this section, then I'm okay with that. I like that effect. So that's what I'm aiming for. Anyway, thanks for joining me today in my fail not fail. I will see you on Sunday when we will do clue 3 of the mystery quilt. Thanks for joining me. See you then. In the meantime, be well, be happy, be quilting. Peace out.